Tonight, the UK toughens up its asylum policy and threatens visa restrictions on 3 African countries. The Home Secretary confirms there will be fewer arrivals and more removals, with refugees returned home as their countries are deemed safe.
If we fail to deal with this crisis, we will draw more people down a path that starts with anger and ends in hatred.
So what does this mean for those fleeing conflict and seeking sanctuary? We'll discuss that tonight. Plus, we speak to the son of a woman sentenced to death over these protests. Former Bangladeshi leader Sheikh Hasina denied ordering the deaths of demonstrators. Today, she was found guilty of crimes against humanity. In Washington, Donald Trump changes his mind and now says he backs the release of all the Epstein files. We go on board the UK's flagship aircraft carrier, now deployed to help protect Europe. And we look ahead to the crucial vote at the United Nations Security Council, which will determine how Gaza is policed and governed. That's all coming up on The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Good evening. We'll begin the programme right here in Westminster tonight. That's because in the past few hours, the Home Secretary has been outlining plans to overhaul how the UK handles asylum seekers and migrants. Like most of Europe and the US, the UK is moving to secure its borders. You'll remember these images. Hundreds of Syrians trekking across Europe. Well, under Shabana Mahmood's plans, many of them would be returned home with their families if their countries are deemed to be safe. And these 3 African countries, Namibia, Angola and the Democratic Republic of Congo, have a month to prove they will take back their citizens who are in the UK illegally or face visa restrictions.
I am signing a new executive order placing travel restrictions on countries including Yemen, Somalia, Haiti, Libya, and numerous others.
It's a move that has echoes of Donald Trump's policies and which was inspired by Denmark, said to have the toughest immigration policy on the continent.
This country will always offer sanctuary to those fleeing danger. We are open, tolerant, and generous. But the public rightly expect that we can determine who enters this country and who must leave.
But how do you define what is safe? And will these plans really act as a deterrent? We'll discuss that tonight. Let's get started, though, with this report from our political correspondent, Tamara Cohen.
The British people have repeatedly voted for controlled immigration.
If you enter Britain illegally, you will be detained and swiftly removed.
People will only stop coming here illegally when they know that they cannot stay here.
Conservative Home Secretaries who wanted to toughen up the asylum system.
The Home Secretary.
Now a Labour one says she'll bring in the most sweeping reforms of modern times to control numbers.
The burden that has fallen on this country has been heavy. 400,000 have sought asylum here in the last 4 years. It is making our country a more divided place. There will never be a justification for the violence and racism of a minority. But if we fail to deal with this crisis, we will draw more people down a path that starts with anger and ends in hatred.
Can we Badenoch?
The Conservatives liked some of it.
I do want to praise the new Home Secretary, Madam Deputy Speaker. She's bringing fresh energy and a clearer focus to this problem, and she has got more done in 70 days in the job than her predecessor did in a year. Some of what she is announcing simply does not go far enough. On this side of the House, we believe that anyone who arrives illegally, especially from safe countries, should be deported and banned from claiming asylum.
The Liberal Democrats dislike the tone.
What is not helpful is the Home Secretary claiming that the country is being torn apart by immigration.
But the Home Secretary shot back.
Unlike him, unfortunately, I am the one that is regularly called a and told to go back home. It is I who knows through my personal experience and that of my constituents just how divisive the issue of asylum has become.
One new proposal is to prioritise removal of families with children whose claims have been refused by force if necessary. Other proposals by the Home Office include limiting the right to family life under Article 8 of the European Human Rights Convention, restricting claims of torture and modern slavery, which it's claimed are being abused, and extending the amount of time in which asylum seekers can settle permanently in the UK from 5 to 20 years. The Home Secretary did promise safe and legal routes for some migrants would be set up.
Well, the strategy is pretty clear. Voters, including left-leaning ones, are deeply concerned about particularly illegal migration and the need for control. And with reform soaring in the polls, the Home Secretary says this is the only way. But some Labour MPs are finding this very hard to stomach. The question is how many and how hard?
The leader of Reform said he was encouraged to a point.
Well, I welcome the Home Secretary's language. I mean, it sounds like she's auditioning to join Reform, but I've got very serious doubts whether any of it can really make a difference.
These Labour MPs are dismayed by the proposals.
It's about focusing on practicalities and not sort of referring to asylum seekers in a way which demonises them and which, frankly, does feed in to the language of the far right.
I think it is cruel and I think it's inhumane, and I think that actually they will not answer the questions that we have.
When we look at this so-called deterrence that the Home Secretary has outlined and briefed ahead of her statement, they remind me very much of what Robert Jenrick did with the painting over the mural for the children, and those deterrents didn't work.
Asylum claims in the past year have been at the highest level ever. There are questions about how much of a dent these proposals will make. Tamara Cohen, Sky News, Westminster.
Let's bring in our chief political correspondent, John Craig. John, we can talk about that dent that it could potentially make in a moment. But just first of all, it's a major overhaul which does mirror the policy of Denmark.
Yes, indeed. And the Home Secretary has only been in the job 10 weeks. She sent officials to Denmark to talk to the Danish government about how the plan works over there. And of course, she's clearly sold on it and has introduced some of the measures here. And there's quite a big international dimension to it. OK, you can argue it's all about British domestic politics and, as critics would say, chasing after Reform UK, Nigel Farage's party. But, I mean, for example, starting with the French, they're keeping that French pilot, the one-in, one-out scheme, not been terribly successful so far, although the government argues that eventually that will work much better. Then, of course, there's a section in there, this is the document, by the way, the Restoring Order and Control. Albania came up. Now
it often does.
Yeah, I know. And not just because England are playing them at football, but she talked about 700 Albanian families whose asylum claims have been rejected, yet their removal is not currently being enforced by the Home Office, despite Albania having a gold standard of cooperation with the UK on returns and being a signatory on the European Convention of Human Rights. Now, more about that in a minute. Now, there was visa penalties as the next section. 3 countries she mentioned in Africa. It was Angola, Congo and Namibia. What the government is saying, we will act against countries who fail to cooperate with the return of their citizens, including through imposing visa penalties. So, also it says this could include, this is from the document, suspending the granting of entry clearance for nationals of a country until it takes back its citizens who are in the UK illegally. Now, during the exchanges in the Commons, Syria came up. And the point that the Home Secretary was making was, look, Syria, the people who are claiming asylum from Syria are people who were fleeing the regime that's already been toppled. So they don't need to, was her argument. So this is going to have widespread implications, particularly in Africa. Now, in terms of Europe, of course, the big debate between the governments and the opposition is that European Convention on Human Rights. And, of course, we heard from both Kemi Badenoch, the Conservative leader, who was leading for the Conservatives, not the Shadow Home Secretary, and also from Danny Kruger, who was speaking for Reform UK. Of course, what the Conservatives and the opposition and the Reform UK argue is this won't work unless you leave the European Convention on Human Rights. She was absolutely adamant, Shabana Mahmood, no, we are not going to do that. As long as we are in government, we are staying in the European Convention on Human Rights.
John, The point also that the Home Secretary made today was that this system is broken. Those before her have tried to reform things. Those after her will probably try and do the same. I mean, just listening to you talk about the French scheme, the one in, one out, the Albanian issue coming up again. These are things that are reoccurring issues that continue to come up no matter which government, which Home Secretary is in power. And they just haven't been able to crack this problem.
But, of course, there are different approaches because, of course, one of the things that the Conservatives frequently mention is, our Rwanda scheme would have worked. And there was criticism of Sir Keir Starmer for, I remember it well, one of the first things he announced when he became Prime Minister in July last year was scrapping that Rwanda scheme. And Chris Philp, the Shadow Home Secretary, was telling Sky News tonight that could have worked. So, yes, you say, yes, it's the same problem, different governments, but they do have a different approach because one of the, as I say, the Labour Party says Rwanda was a gimmick, and of course the Tories are now saying some of Labour's measures are gimmicks. So there's a political argument, of course, but the Rwanda scheme, that's not going to happen. That's finished, but the government is looking at some other countries as well.
John, thank you, as always. Now, Bangladesh's exiled Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has been sentenced to death. The 78-year-old was convicted of crimes against humanity for ordering a crackdown on student-led protests last year, which killed hundreds of people. She fled to safety last August and is now currently in New Delhi. She's condemned the verdict as politically motivated and biased, as Neville Lazarus reports.
We have decided to inflict her with only one sentence, that is sentence of death.
This was the moment crowds cheered and clapped as the verdict was read aloud and broadcast live on state television. A judgment that had the country on edge. Bangladesh's former Prime Minister, Sheikh Hasina, sentenced to death for crimes against humanity. She is charged with murder, torture, disappearance and using lethal weapons for maximum harm against student protesters last year.
Until this verdict is carried out, we cannot believe that the execution will actually take place. Only when we see her in the execution dock, when the noose is hanging around her neck, will we understand that the verdict has been implemented.
Sheikh Hasina wasn't there for the trial as she fled to India when her government was overthrown in last year's July uprising. A UN rights report found that she personally directed and coordinated the crackdown, in which over 1,400 people were killed in the violence.
The case against Sheikh Hasina and the two other accused was based on a lengthy investigation by the Prosecution Investigation Unit. There were 50-plus witnesses that gave evidence. There was 10,000 pages of material that was used. There was physical evidence.
Sheikh Hasina, who ruled the country for over 20 years, refutes these allegations. In a statement released after the judgment, she said, "The verdicts announced against me have been made by a rigged tribunal, established and presided over by an unelected government with no democratic mandate. They are biased and politically motivated." Authorities are taking no chances and have enhanced security across the nation, with paramilitary and police out on patrol. Though an appeal can be made to the Supreme Court, it would require her to be under arrest or surrendered to file it, which looks most unlikely anytime soon. Neville Lazarus, Sky News, Delhi.
Well, I've been speaking to Sheikh Hasina's son, Sajib Wazed, speaking on the phone from Washington. He gave his reaction to his mother's death sentence.
It was very much expected. The trials were rushed. Trial of such significance was completed within about 100 days, which is unprecedented in Bangladesh. You have, in order to expedite the trials, the government had to amend the laws to enable the trial in this court. However, there is no parliament, and only parliament can amend laws, so that in itself was illegal. And not to mention that this regime itself is unelected, illegal, undemocratic. None of this has a legal basis, but the worst part is they would not allow my mother to appoint her own defense lawyers. They were not allowed into the courts at all, and she was represented by a public defender assigned by the regime. So it's a mockery.
Mr. Wazir, I just want to give our audience a sense of what Sheikh Hasina has been accused of. She was sentenced today for crimes against humanity over a deadly crackdown on a student-led uprising last year. So just more specifically, Sheikh Hasina was found guilty of allowing lethal force to be used against protesters, 1,400 of whom died during the unrest last year. Do you deny that what we saw take place on the streets, where unarmed protesters were fired on by the security force at the orders of your mother?
I denied. I have a problem with the fact that you claim they were on the orders of my mother. Yes, the situation turned violent. In some cases, the police used lethal force, excessive force, but there was no real investigation done. My mother, before the protests, before our government fell, had formed a judicial committee to investigate all deaths. And that 1,400 number hasn't really been verified because the regime itself only provided a list of 800. And the UN has never provided a list of names. And that list also includes police officers, law enforcement agents, and deaths after August 5th, when my mother was no longer in power. It includes those deaths as well, which were mostly our party activists. So there was never a proper investigation done, and this claim of her order issuing an order was based on a short clip of a recording, which the full clip was never played. We have put the full clip online where she is ordering the arrest of violent protesters. She's expressing concern for the lives of civilians. And so that is all standard procedure.
So then what would you say when the UN declares the verdict as an important moment for the victims? They have regretted the imposition of the death penalty, which they say they oppose in all circumstances, but they say that this is an important moment for the victims, many of their families in the courtroom today.
Look, we are all for justice, but it should have been done with a proper investigation. What about the deaths of the police officers and the law enforcement agents? What about the deaths of our party activists? There has been no justice for that. Why are those people that were responsible for those deaths not being put on trial? Isn't that an important question? Justice cannot be one-sided only.
Well, I would say
everyone has seen images of police officers being killed. The UN report lists police officers killed, but there's been no justice for that.
That's Sajib Wazir, the son of Sheikh Hasina, speaking to me a little earlier. You're watching The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Still to come, President Trump reverses his stance and calls on Republicans to vote for the release of all the Epstein files.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin.
The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks.
If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach. This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.
What might happen if Russia attacked the UK?
This is clearly an enormous show of force.
It is definitely out of the ordinary.
We ran a war game with former ministers back in the hot seat.
Ben Wallace.
Amber Rudd.
Jack Straw.
It's the kind of war game that's genuinely tested inside government.
The Russians are signalling that there may be an attack.
Russia knows our weaknesses, but do you? I'm Deborah Haynes. From Sky News and Tortoise, this is The War Game. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back. President Trump has tonight pledged to release everything on Jeffrey Epstein after he dropped his opposition to demands for official files about the late paedophile financier to be published. His comments come ahead of a vote tomorrow in the US House of Representatives.
So I'm for I don't. They can do whatever they want. We'll give them everything. Sure, I would. Let the Senate look at it. Let anybody look at it. But don't talk about it too much because, honestly, I don't want to take it away from us. It's really a Democrat problem. The Democrats were Epstein's friends, all of them. And it's a hoax. The whole thing is a hoax. And I don't want to take it away from really the greatness of what the Republican Party has accomplished over the last period of time.
That was President Trump a little earlier today. Well, one of Jeffrey Epstein's accusers, Alicia Arden, has urged US lawmakers to vote in favour of releasing documents collected on the late paedophile financier. Ms. Arden and attorney Gloria Allred were speaking at a news conference in Los Angeles a little earlier.
Speaking as one of the victims, I beg you to release these files once and for all. I mean, there is no valid reason for refusing to do so. So you can't claim that it is to protect the victims. I mean, when it is the victims, myself and the victims that have been calling for the files to be released. And those who were complacent in Jeffrey Epstein's crimes will finally be named. And the American public will get the transparency that they've been promised and which we all deserve and they deserve. But if the House does not vote to be releasing these files, it will be very disappointing to all of us.
I am concerned with what the president has not said. First, he has not explained to the public that a vote to release the files is not really necessary. The House Oversight Committee has already subpoenaed the files, and some of the files, but not all of them, have been released. The committee could seek a vote holding the Department of Justice in contempt, but most likely they do not have enough votes to take that step. Further, the Department of Justice could have released all of the files and still could, voluntarily. They did not need a vote in Congress or a subpoena to do that. However, because they have not released all the files, certain members of Congress want to vote on this issue, and now they'll have the opportunity to do that. If the House votes to support the release of the files, the issue will then go to the Senate for a vote. I note that the president has not urged the senators to vote to release the files. Even if the senators do vote in favor of the release, the bill will then go to the president. And the president has not indicated that he would even sign such a bill.
Well, let's bring in our David Blevins, who joins us live from Washington. David, I mean, this is a major U-turn from President Trump now to call for the release of these files. And no doubt it's come from a lot of pressure from his own MAGA base.
Yes, things have really snowballed, Yalda, since the release of those 23,000 documents by the Oversight Committee last week, not just because of what was in those documents, but because 4 Republicans aligned with Democrats to force a vote on the release of the files in the House. And, of course, because of a stonking row played out in public between the president and a woman who was, until very recently, his most vocal of allies, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. He's now calling her Marjorie Traitor Greene. She says that's because she led the charge and calls for the Epstein files to be released, and that she now fears for her own safety. There is going to be this vote in the House tomorrow. Given the president's U-turn, I think we can safely speculate that it will be an overwhelming majority. It should then go to the Senate for approval. Asked a short time ago if he thought the Senate should vote to release the files, the president said, "I'm all for it." And as you've just heard there from a lawyer for the victims, at that point, the only thing standing in the way of the release of the files in full would be Donald Trump's own signature as president. And asked this evening if he would sign that bill, he said, "Sure, I would," but this is a very important qualifier. Bearing in mind that the Oversight Committee is in the middle of an investigation and that the President has commissioned the Justice Department to carry out another investigation into Epstein's links to high-profile Democrats, that could result in the files being released in a heavily redacted way, and some would argue that that will simply fuel the conspiracy of cover-up.
Yeah, David, I understand we can have a look at that row that you talked about with Marjorie Taylor Greene and Donald Trump. Let's just play that clip. No, we're not playing that right now. But David, just separately to all of this, we've discussed there the Epstein files. I just want to turn your attention away to Donald Trump not dealing with an issue that's a domestic issue, but an international issue. And we spoke about this, you and I, last week, the question of Venezuela and how things were ratcheting up there. Just bring us up to date on the situation.
Yes, the US has carried out 21 airstrikes, killing 83 people on boats in the Caribbean and East Pacific. The Pentagon says this is a battle against what it calls drug trafficking terrorists. Others would suggest that it is an attempt to force regime change in Venezuela, of course. There's been a significant US build-up in the region, 9 warships, including the USS Gerald Ford, the world's largest warship, a nuclear submarine, F-35 jets. And then last night, the president surprised us by suggesting that Venezuela now wanted to talk. And a short time, he was asked about that and expressed a willingness to do so. Let's listen to what the president said.
You suggested Maduro wants to talk. Are you prepared to speak with him directly? Would you commit to doing that before you order strikes?
Yeah, I probably would talk to him. Yeah, I talk to everybody. He's done tremendous damage to our country, primarily because of drugs, but really because we have that problem with other countries too. But more than any other country, the release of prisoners into our country has been a disaster. He's emptied his jails. Others have done that also. He has not been good to the United States. So we'll see what happens. At a certain period of time, I'll be talking to him.
So he would, and I quote, probably speak to President Nicolas Maduro before carrying out any airstrikes. He also said another very unusual thing in relation to drug trafficking, that he would be okay with airstrikes on Mexico. He said it isn't something he's planning, but that he would be okay with it. So those were very threatening words from a very hoarse president this evening. When asked why he'd lost his voice, he said he had been shouting at stupid people because one country wanted to renegotiate the terms of its trade deal with the United States. So as always, never a dull moment in the Oval Office, Yalda.
No, absolutely not. David, thank you so much. This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Next up on the programme, we speak to the UN's humanitarian chief about the world's largest humanitarian crisis in Sudan.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club.
4 more years!
Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
Welcome back. Let's turn now to Sudan's Darfur region, where hundreds have died after paramilitary forces seized control of the city of Al Fasher in the northwest of the country. The RSF is accused of mass looting, sexual violence and armed raids. Our correspondent Yusra El-Bagir reported on the horrific stories emerging.
Makeshift displacement shelters are clustered across the state. Inside, thousands are waiting for news from Al Fasher, the besieged regional capital they risked their lives to escape.
We gave them money,
but the rapid support forces took some women away who couldn't pay into a room. We don't know if they were beaten or raped. They threatened us and we got money out. We couldn't sleep from the sounds of the men being whipped and robbed nearby. All my brothers are trapped there. There is no one to take care of me.
Stories like Zahra's are everywhere in this camp, from the youngest to the eldest. Hawa says she watched her 2 daughters get raped by the RSF in front of her and hasn't seen them since they fled in shame. Story after story of absolute brutality.
Yusra reporting there, well, tens of thousands of people are estimated to have fled Al-Fashir and the surrounding villages with no access to water, food and medical assistance, but many more remain unaccounted for. The civil war, which began in 2023, has created what the United Nations has described as the world's largest humanitarian crisis. I've been speaking to the UN's humanitarian chief, Tom Fletcher, who's just left Darfur, and asked him about the horrifying reports emerging.
Well, horrifying is the right word. You just get this sense of rampant brutality and impunity. I spoke to so many people who told me stories of mass executions, mass rape, sexual violence being weaponized as part of the conflict. They told me of the horrors they'd had to go through, the atrocities they'd had to go through just to escape Al-Fashir. One woman carrying her neighbors, her dead neighbors, malnourished child, and then she herself was attacked on the road as she fled towards Tawila, where I was for a couple of days earlier this week. It's utterly grim right now. It's the epicenter of suffering in the world.
Yeah, I mean, to the point where there have been reports that the blood spilt there can be seen from space.
That's right, and I've seen that satellite footage from the Yale lab. I mean, these are horrifying images of the blood on the sand. And our great concern is we've got to make sure there are teams going in to investigate these atrocities. Al-Fashir is a crime scene right now, but we've also got to make sure we've got protection for civilians from the future atrocities, which could come in the Kordofans. We don't know which direction this conflict will go in next, but the survivors I met are terrified.
Yeah, I mean, the stories we're hearing of children appearing in the middle of the desert to so-called safe zones without their parents, having witnessed complete and utter devastation and horror, killing and brutality. Tom, what are you asking the international community to do now? Because it feels very much like the world has been watching and frankly silent.
So yeah, kids have really borne the brunt of this conflict, and we hear that 1 in 5 of those killed in Al-Fashir was a child, and so many of the people I've met have been kids who were here on their own. I approached a group of kids kicking a ball around a couple of nights ago and was having a normal conversation with them, and then went to just gesture towards the Man City logo on one child's shirt, and he recoiled from me. He flinched, and this is a 6-year-old. So what has he seen and experienced to be that terrified of other people? So I'm asking for several things. Firstly, we've got to be more generous in our funding. Our appeal is only 32% backed at the moment. And if people could show an ounce of the courage that those fleeing Al-Fashir have demonstrated to me, then we could respond with a level of generosity and solidarity that we've so far failed to do. And I'm staggered by that. All I'm asking globally is 1% of what we spend on arms. And we could be saving over 100 million lives this year. I'm just appalled that I even have to put it in those terms. I'm also asking for the international community to protect civilians. And that means making sure that we've got the investigations underway, but also protection from future atrocities. And I'm asking for a much more vigorous, energized diplomacy here. This can't be so complex, so difficult that the world can't fix it. And we've seen some momentum. We've seen the Quad, Egypt, America, Saudi, the UAE just recently getting more engaged. I'm in daily contact with them all, including the White House envoy, Dr. Massad Boulos. But, we need to sustain that diplomatic engagement and show the creativity and patience that's needed.
Yeah, I mean, in the first instance, as you say, dealing with the humanitarian crisis, because frankly, it is the biggest humanitarian crisis on the planet right now. But is there also a sense that there needs to be accountability for the bloodshed that we have continued to see and hear about?
Absolutely. There must be accountability. There must be investigations. People must be held to account for their actions. And for me, that means the people who fire the guns. It means the people who give the order to them to fire the guns. But also, I think anyone providing weapons at the moment to this conflict should behave more responsibly. They should look at themselves very hard in the mirror, because the last thing Sudan needs right now is more guns and bullets for this conflict. It needs food and water and medicine and dignity and safety for these survivors.
And what we're seeing the civilians of Sudan endure time and time again, we could go back 20 years and, you know, we'd be having the same conversation about Darfur, frankly, then as we are now, which is why this whole situation feels so haunting, is that there are so many competing forces, regionally, internationally, playing a part here. You know, countries that are meddling in the affairs and trying to settle scores within Sudan, supplying weapons to both sides. And there doesn't feel at this point like there is anyone holding, you know, these forces accountable. You spoke there about the Quad, but frankly, the finger of blame has been pointed at the UAE and other powers who are playing an active role in fueling this conflict.
So this is why my colleague Volker Turk at the UN Commission of Human Rights has been so strong in calling for clear investigations and for the need to get people in to investigate this crime scene of Al-Fasher. It's why I have been sat in front of the Security Council challenging them to do much more, to be more active. It's why I'll leave here and go to Geneva and talk to member states about the need to bring so much more voltage to this response. Now, I can't explain why the world has been so indifferent. I can't explain why it's not been able to stop this conflict. But, you know, I have the responsibility of passing on these stories, of bearing witness to what I've seen inside Darfur. And people there are saying, is the help coming? Is anyone going to stop this? And I want to be able to say to them that, yes, the international community is going to stop this and that the help is coming.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, you know, what I want to reiterate is the most terrifying thing about all of this is those who are committing these crimes are filming it and posting it on social media and elsewhere themselves. This is sort of the level of impunity that's taking place right now.
Absolutely. I mean, I've written and thought a lot about the way that social media can actually bring us together, but we're seeing the way it polarizes and divides us. And particularly with lots of those videos that came out of Al-Fasher, this was box office brutality. And it's utterly appalling. It's utterly shocking. And there has to be accountability. People have to be held to account for what they've done.
You've also recently been in Gaza, bearing witness there. Just your assessment and takeaway, because it has been an incredibly difficult 2 years. The hostages, since we last spoke, have been released. And, of course, we're seeing a very shaky ceasefire. But if you can just give me your assessment of where you think things are going to go now. There is talk of a stabilising force, but are you worried about the situation on the ground and whether, you know, those who desperately need humanitarian assistance will continue to get it?
Yeah, this is a major, major concern, and I'm still very, very worried. I was in Gaza just a few weeks ago and in Sharm el-Sheikh, where President Trump and other world leaders announced this really important ceasefire deal and the peace plan, which does give us an opportunity to turn the corner. But we've got to implement that plan, including full humanitarian access. Now, we're about halfway through the 60-day plan that I set out at that time, and we have seen a real surge in what we can get in. We're getting millions of meals out. We're getting tens of thousands of tents in. So important right now as winter is approaching and so many people's homes are flooded. We're starting to stand up the health sector again. We're starting to get kids back into some form of education. But this is a drop in the ocean. So much more is needed. And we're still facing impediments. We've only got half of the crossings open into Gaza that need to be open. Many of the NGO partners on whom we rely so much are not getting the access that they need. So we can't relent on that pressure for genuine, full, unhindered UN humanitarian access.
Tom Fletcher, thank you so much as always for joining us.
Thanks, Yalda.
And we'll be talking about the situation in Gaza in a moment on the programme. You're watching The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Next up, one of Britain's most powerful warships, the aircraft carrier HMS Prince of Wales, on NATO patrol to help deter Putin.
Eastern Libya is the new doorway to Europe for people being smuggled from Africa and Asia.
We are close to Greece. You can see it.
We've obtained unprecedented access to the authorities.
Do you feel you're just scratching the surface?
We've been on the raids, out with the Coast Guard,
Absolutely desperate.
and inside the detention centres.
How did you cope with that?
To find what's pushing people to Europe and what's driving the authorities here to stop them.
Mayhem in the Middle East, rippling in America's West.
Get back! Get back!
The resolve of these protesters is now being seriously tested. I saw police being forced or pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests.
None of this is a peaceful protest.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles. How are you feeling?
I am angry. It is an anti-woman agenda.
Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support, but it's nasty out there.
Anybody else?
Should the Defence Secretary and the Vice...
Wait, what country are you
from? The UK.
Okay, we don't give a crap about your opinion and your reporting. Why don't you go back to your country where you have a major migrant problem?
President Biden, do you trust President Xi? President Biden says that this meeting went well. He said real progress was made on a whole host of issues. Will your candidates win?
I hope so. I think they will. I think they're great candidates.
There's no doubt that Kamala Harris and her team are harnessing the power of social media. Do you think Kamala is brat?
Kamala's brat.
Were you scared?
Yeah, we were scared. It was terrible. Strong wind, building tearing down.
As them say, our God works, so we can't do nothing.
The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. Sky News, get the full story first. Free wherever you get your news. Ghislaine Maxwell has pleaded not guilty to all 6 charges against her. Mum, how are you feeling today?
Jeffrey said, you answer to Ghislaine, you just don't cross her.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin.
The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks.
If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach. This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.
Welcome back. It's taken on the Houthi militants in the Red Sea and passed through the South China Sea. Now, the UK's flagship aircraft carrier, the HMS Prince of Wales, is patrolling the waters off the Italian coast. It's part of a NATO plan to deter Russian aggression. Our security and defence editor Deborah Haynes went on board.
A different kind of tourist attraction off Italy's southern coast. The Royal Navy's flagship aircraft carrier, loaded with F-35 stealth jets, hundreds of sailors, and the visiting defence and foreign secretaries. They say their ship is ready to fight, and it's sending a message to Vladimir Putin.
Ready for NATO at 10 days' notice, ready for the UK at 5 days' notice. And this is a good example of how we meet this new era of threats with hard power and strong alliances.
HMS Prince of Wales has been to the other side of the world and back, supported by other warships from the UK and its allies, and flying more than 1,000 sorties with its jets.
Yes, this is a peacetime deployment, but this carrier strike group has tested some very real threats. First, through the Red Sea, where Iranian-backed Houthi militants pose a danger. It also was just 200 miles off the Russian coast when the ship visited Japan, and as well it passed through the South China Sea, where the Chinese would surely have been watching.
For the crew, after nearly 8 months at sea, they're glad to be heading home. We weren't allowed to speak to any of them on camera, but there were lots of grins behind the scenes.
Inside the carrier, it's like a labyrinth. The ship is 200 metres long. It's 65,000 tonnes. There are multiple layers. It has a crew of 800 sailors, and then it has an air wing as well. So right now, there are 1,600 personnel on board.
Go! Shoulder up!
Back in safe waters. But these are not peaceful times. Are you ready to go to war?
Absolutely. We have returned to the Mediterranean and the Euro-Atlantic stronger than we departed for NATO, having declared full operating capability. We have 2 aircraft carriers so that we always have one available. And I am really, really confident on everything I've seen from the last 8 months that this carrier strike group is ready should we be required to deliver whatever the government asks of me.
Remarkably, around half of the ship's crew is under the age of 25. None of them will have any experience of fighting in a war. But they must surely all know that could change. Deborah Haynes, Sky News, Naples, Italy.
Let's focus on Gaza now, because in the next few minutes, the United Nations Security Council will vote on a US-backed peace plan that will introduce an international peacekeeping force and set up a governing council for the territory. The draft resolution has been criticised by Hamas and other armed groups. But will it be approved? Well, let's bring in our Middle East correspondent, Adam Parsons. And Adam, I mean, no surprises really that Hamas are now criticising this and pushing back. But frankly, you and I were there when the deal in Sharm el-Sheikh was unveiled. We remember the 20-point peace plan. This was very much on the cards and discussed as part of that overall plan.
Yeah, this is the continuation of that process, and this is about trying to get legitimacy for all of the things that were dreamt up by Donald Trump and his advisors and the countries around that Sharm el-Sheikh meeting, that peace deal that was Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, and that relatively small group of advisors who came up with this US-led plan that involves the Board of Peace with Donald Trump as the chairman, the demilitarization of Gaza, of Hamas laying down its weapons, and with the Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. All of those pieces still to happen. This largely is about all of those bits, Yalda, but at the same time, it's really about the International Stabilization Force. It's this concept of a military force that will come in and will monitor Hamas laying down its weapons, that will provide a safe corridor for humanitarian aid, and that will try and maintain peace between what is inevitably going to be rival factions in Gaza. And like so many elements of this, it's vague, it is undecided. We don't actually know who would make up this stabilization force. What we know is that there is a US proposal. We know there's a rival Russian and slightly Chinese proposal that strips out that board of peace, but even then it's not clear who would be running Gaza. And we do know that Arab states, notably the Saudis, wanted a clause put in that says that this would be a pathway to Palestinian, well, to Gazan self-determination and Palestinian statehood, something that we know that Benjamin Netanyahu absolutely rejects. But this would be a first step towards that. And the mood music at the moment, or a hostage to fortune here, is that it may just have the votes to get through.
Adam, thank you so much for bringing us up to date. We were just looking at those live pictures coming out of the United Nations where that Security Council vote is going to take place. You're looking at Mike Waltz, the US ambassador to the United Nations. As soon as that happens, we will be bringing that to you. But that's it from me and the team. Anna Botting is up next with the news at 10.